Imagine this. You wake up in a world where everything feels just slightly off. The sun still rises, coffee still brews, the dog still barks outside your window, but something is missing. Not stolen, just absent, like a word on the tip of your tongue that you can never quite recall. At first, you go about your day like usual. You shower, dress, scroll, eat, but under the static buzz of routine, there's a strange hollowness clinging to the edges of your thoughts, like a shadow that moves when you don't. No tragedy has struck, no heartbreak, no loss, and yet, a whisper grows louder, something's wrong. You try to ignore it, you drown it in music, tasks, conversations, but it keeps pushing through, like weeds through pavement. Something you can't see but feel, a presence of absence. Then, it hits you. You're not really trying anymore. You haven't in weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. You've been breathing, but not reaching, speaking, but not meaning, moving, but not living. You've been on autopilot, smiling when expected, nodding at the right moments, saying, "I'm good," when asked. But deep down, a part of you has quietly stopped fighting, exploring, risking, hoping. You have become a convincing ghost of yourself, efficient, agreeable, competent, and almost entirely empty. And now you're asking the question no one dares to say out loud: if I'm no longer trying, am I still alive? Not biologically. Biologically, you're still ticking, the heart still beats, the lungs still rise and fall, but spiritually, psychologically, existentially, something has flatlined. Somewhere along the way, trying became exhausting, or embarrassing, or pointless, so you let it go. And at first, it felt like relief. No more striving, no more pressure, no more disappointment, just stillness, numbness, silence. But here's the paradox: the stillness you once craved now suffocates you. The silence you called peace now howls like a scream underwater. The freedom from trying has become a slow-motion death. So now you ask, what is trying, really? Is it ambition? Desire? Hope? Is it the human spirit clinging to meaning in a world of entropy? Or is it delusion, just ego dressed in effort? And what does it mean to stop? To stop trying is not the same as rest. Rest rejuvenates, stillness renews, but stopping is different. Stopping is letting go of the rope in a tug-of-war with life. It's surrender without serenity. It's sleepwalking toward the grave, long before the body follows. Look around. You know people who have stopped. They fill trains, offices, relationships, screens. People who wake up, eat, work, laugh, text, scroll, sleep, on loop, but inside, they're fading, slowly decomposing behind polished smiles and filtered photos. They've stopped trying to understand, stopped trying to grow, stopped trying to feel, and they don't even realize it. Because when you stop trying, the death is quiet. No sirens, no screams, just a slow erasure of self, a soft dissolution of dreams. And the terrifying thing? You can live that way for decades and no one will question it. In fact, they'll reward you for it. They'll call you stable, reasonable, mature. You'll be applauded for your compliance, not your courage. But deep down, you'll know that somewhere inside you, a war was lost without a single bullet fired. So here's the question you've probably avoided your whole life: why do we stop trying? Why do we, as humans, born hungry, curious, relentless, choose stagnation over struggle? What force could be so powerful, so invisible, that it convinces us to abandon our very essence? Is it fear? Is it exhaustion? Or is it something deeper, something built into the very structure of the world, whispering that trying is foolish and comfort is king? And more disturbingly, the freedom from trying has become a slow-motion death. So now you ask, what is trying, really? What happens to a soul that no longer strains against the limits of its own becoming? That question, uncomfortable, disorienting, vital, is where our descent begins. Because this isn't about motivation. This isn't a pep talk. This is an autopsy of the human will, an excavation of what drives us, and what kills us long before our final breath. So if you've ever felt the heaviness of numb ambition, if you've ever caught yourself floating in routines that once lit you up, if you've ever feared that you're quietly fading behind the illusion of being fine, then listen closely. The pulse is weak, but it's not gone. And the truth buried underneath all this still has teeth. Because the day you stop trying is not just the day you stop growing. It is the day a part of you begins to die. And yet, what if that death is not a failure, but a signal? A message from the self beneath the self, not an end, but a confrontation. And the only way out is deeper in. There is a strange kind of death that no one warns you about. It doesn't come with mourning or eulogies, no black veils or weeping families. It arrives dressed in comfort and convenience. It speaks in gentle voices, "You've done enough. Take it easy. You don't need to prove anything anymore." And so, piece by piece, you begin to let go, not of life, but of your edge. Of that dangerous, restless flame that once made you ache for something more. This is the death of effort, the death of striving, the slow atrophy of the soul. But why does it happen? The answer lies not in laziness, but in something far more intricate, far more ancient. It is a hidden architecture of thought, woven through psychology, philosophy, and culture, that tells you, in subtle and persistent ways, to stop trying is to be safe, to want more is to be ungrateful, to struggle is to be broken. Let's start with the psychological roots. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." That's the real threat trying presents. It pulls you toward yourself, not your image, not your roles, you, the raw, unscripted self. And for most, that is unbearable. Trying demands confrontation with your inadequacy. It exposes you to failure, judgment, chaos. It risks shame. Every act of reaching is a declaration that this moment is not enough. And yet we are taught, especially now, that peace comes from acceptance, from being content, from loving what is. But here's the paradox, true peace does not come from avoiding the storm, it comes from surviving it. And yet we've built a world where the storm is sterilized, where effort is pathologized, where rest isn't recovery, it's escape. Nietzsche called this the will to comfort, a force that drags the human spirit toward mediocrity under the guise of virtue. He warned of a society that kills its heroes by taming them into agreeable citizens. His last man is not evil, he is simply dulled. He no longer climbs. He no longer dreams. He has forgotten what it means to fight for a future that doesn't yet exist. Sound familiar? Our modern condition, especially in affluent, overstimulated societies, is one of passive saturation. Everything we once had to earn is now given instantly: entertainment, connection, information, identity. There is no need to try, because the world offers you a simulation of meaning at your fingertips. But these simulations come at a cost. As Aldous Huxley foresaw in Brave New World, we are not enslaved by pain, but by pleasure, by endless distraction, by engineered satisfaction. The soul decays not in fire, but in foam. Why try, when everything you need to feel fine is available without effort? But fine is not the goal of existence. Fulfillment is, transcendence is, becoming is, and becoming requires friction. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering was not a curse, but the engine of life. That desire, even when painful, was what made life meaningful. Without striving, the human experience collapses into stagnation. But here's the trap: the mind is wired to avoid suffering. It's evolution's way of keeping you alive. Pain equals danger. Discomfort equals risk. The subconscious will do anything to pull you back into the known, the predictable, the safe. So what happens when your own biology becomes your prison? You build a self around avoidance. A version of you that smiles when it should scream, that settles when it should soar, that says, "This is good enough," not because it is, but because anything more would require effort. Jean-Paul Sartre, the father of existentialism, believed that we are condemned to be free. That is, we are cursed with the responsibility to choose, to create our essence through action. And yet we run from that freedom. We hide behind labels, roles, identities, systems, anything that will spare us from the weight of choice. Stopping, ceasing to try, is one of the most seductive escapes from that freedom. It lets you pretend you've arrived, that you've found yourself, when in reality, you've just built a box around the self and called it me. But here's the disturbing part: society rewards this. Aldous Huxley, Viktor Frankl, even Kierkegaard saw it, the danger of a world that medicates the spirit with comfort, where existential hunger is numbed by consumption, where every urge to evolve is treated as restlessness to be therapized away. We pathologize passion. We call yearning a disorder. We mistake burnout not as a cry for deeper purpose, but as a sign to lower our expectations. And so the collective soul withers. We're told to accept ourselves, but never asked which self we're accepting. We're told to love the journey, but only if the road is paved, scenic, and GPS guided. We're told to be enough, but never told that enough is a moving target, not a resting place. So why do you stop trying? Because trying makes you vulnerable. Because trying means admitting there's something missing. Because trying is an act of faith, and faith has become a foreign language in a world that worships certainty. But the deeper truth? You stopped trying because no one ever taught you how to try without shame. You were punished for mistakes, graded for performance, laughed at for caring too much. You learned to play it cool, to act like nothing mattered. You confused apathy with wisdom. You wore detachment like armor. You called it letting go, but really, you just gave up. And now you are haunted by a quiet question that won't leave you alone. Is this all there is? Not because life has nothing left to offer, but because you stopped reaching for it. You stopped pulling the thread. You stopped breaking the pattern. You stopped choosing the harder path, not because it was wrong, but because it was uncertain. And now you are here, breathing, yes, but fading. So what now? If the psychological, philosophical, and cultural forces around you are all conspiring to lull you into stillness, what does it take to wake up? What is the cost of reawakening the will? What happens when you start trying again, not to win, or prove, or impress, but simply to feel alive? What is the price of becoming again? That question, that is the fault line, and crossing it will change everything. You didn't notice it at first. How could you? The unraveling began with silence, with a skipped ambition here, a delayed decision there. You told yourself it was rest, or wisdom, or balance, and everyone around you nodded in agreement, because they were unraveling too. But the consequences of not trying don't explode, they dissolve, not with a scream, but with a sigh. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Because when a person stops trying, they don't just stop growing, they begin to forget who they are. Not all at once, not in any dramatic way, but in the little things. The spark in your eye when you spoke about a dream, the hunger that used to follow rejection, the courage to step into chaos when comfort called your name. Those vanish first. Then the subtle shifts begin. You stop finishing books. You avoid deep conversations. You numb discomfort with distractions that pretend to be passions. You laugh more, but feel less. You keep busy, but rarely move forward. And deep down, a terrifying question starts to form. Not, what am I doing? But, what have I become? This is the soul's slow disappearance. And most people are living it right now. But how? Because the world is built to reward your stagnation. Let's look closer. Modern life is engineered for cognitive ease. Everything is designed to eliminate friction, from swiping for a date to having groceries arrive at your door with 2 taps. In theory, this should liberate you. Free your mind to explore, to create, to expand. Instead, it backfires. Psychologists call it the cognitive miser effect. The brain prefers to expend as little effort as possible. It defaults to heuristics, routines, mental shortcuts. The more you automate your existence, the more your neural pathways reinforce inaction. You become efficient, predictable, safe, and slowly, your tolerance for effort erodes. The small resistances that once strengthened you, boredom, uncertainty, challenge, become intolerable. You start avoiding anything that asks for more than a few seconds of focus. You scroll instead of read. You vent instead of reflect. You seek dopamine hits instead of meaning. This isn't a personal flaw. It's the consequence of a world optimized for convenience. But here's where it gets darker. You start to mistake the absence of pain for the presence of peace. You start calling your numbness contentment. You mistake being unstimulated for being stable. And all the while, you're drifting. Neuroscience calls it learned helplessness. When you repeatedly experience that your actions have little effect, or that trying leads to failure or judgment, you eventually stop trying altogether. It's not just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain literally rewires itself to expect futility. So even when opportunity knocks again, you barely turn your head. Not because you don't want it, but because some part of you no longer believes it matters. The philosopher Viktor Frankl saw this during the darkest periods of human suffering. He wrote that the true agony of the concentration camps wasn't just physical pain, it was the death of hope. He watched men waste away not from hunger, but from despair. From believing there was no future worth reaching for. This same despair lives quietly in millions today. Not from war, not from famine, but from lives stripped of striving. We have everything, and yet we feel nothing. Why? Because trying isn't just a tool for success, it's the language of the soul. It's how the self speaks its desires into the world. When you stop trying, you don't just silence your ambition, you silence your becoming. Now think about that on a collective scale. What happens to a society where most people stop becoming? You get mass apathy. You get outrage without action. You get art that imitates trends, not truth. You get politics driven by spectacle instead of vision. You get spiritual movements that offer healing without transformation. You get a culture of simulation, where everyone is pretending to feel, pretending to care, pretending to live. And here's the final twist. This doesn't just hurt you, it hurts everyone around you. When you stop trying, you stop inspiring. You stop challenging. You stop shining. And the people closest to you begin adjusting downward. Not out of malice, but because your dimming teaches them it's okay to dim too. Trying, then, is not just personal, it's contagious. So is quitting. One person who dares to keep striving, keep growing, keep becoming, despite the noise, despite the fear, can light a fire in a dozen others. But one person who silently lets go, who accepts a small life while craving a great one, can bury that desire in others too. And here's what no one tells you. The longer you stay in that place, the harder it is to remember you were ever somewhere else. Not because it's more comfortable, but because the memory of effort begins to feel like someone else's life. You begin to say things like, that's just not who I am anymore. I'm not that ambitious. I've learned to be realistic. This is enough for me, but is it? Or have you just adapted to a cage so gradually that you forgot it has bars? Now ask yourself this. What is the cost of never asking that question again? Not just for your career, your goals, your dreams, but for your aliveness. Because this isn't about achieving more. It's about refusing to become less. It's about remembering that every time you choose not to try, you're not just preserving energy, you're practicing death. One moment at a time. And so, here we are. You've seen the hidden forces that lure you into stillness. You've felt the gravity of the slow decline. You know now what's really at stake. But the most important question remains, what would it take to rebel against it? Not with noise, not with rage, but with a single, silent decision, to try again. That moment is closer than you think, but it won't feel like motivation. It will feel like madness, like defying gravity with broken wings. And yet, that is where the becoming begins again. You won't hear a trumpet when it happens. No grand announcement, no cinematic moment, just a quiet defiance inside you, barely louder than a whisper. It says, try again, not because you know you'll succeed, not because you feel strong, but because something inside you has begun to stir, something ancient, something feral. It's the return of fire. But here's the strange part, when it first returns, it will hurt. That's how you'll know it's real, because trying again is not an act of confidence, it's an act of rebellion. Against every internal voice that said you peaked, against the persona you've curated, the one that's always fine, always composed, always realistic. Against the soft chains of comfort that wrap themselves around your ankles while calling themselves self-care. The rebellion doesn't begin with a leap, it begins with a twitch, a resistance, the smallest refusal to stay exactly where you are. This is what most people miss. Rebirth doesn't look like glory, it looks like shaking. Like opening a blank page and forgetting how to write. Like returning to the gym and realizing your body forgot what strength feels like. Like speaking up and hearing your voice tremble. Like caring again, and hating yourself for it. Because caring makes you vulnerable. Because trying again reopens every scar. But that's the point. Growth is resurrection through friction. And friction means pain. But pain, as C. Lewis once wrote, is God's megaphone. It wakes you from the sleep of almost. From the illusion of safety. From the polite coma of a life half-lived. So what does breaking free actually look like? It looks like doing what terrifies you, not because you're fearless, but because you're finally willing to feel afraid. It looks like dismantling the identity you've worn like armor. Let's be honest, part of you likes the story that says you're tired, or too late, or already complete. That story protects you. It explains away your potential. It gives you permission to stay still without feeling like a coward. But now, you're starting to see the cost of that story. And if you want to reclaim your life, you have to kill the lie before it kills you. That's the first step. Burn the myth that who you were yesterday is the limit of who you can become today. History is written by those who refuse to stay still. By the ones who tried again after failure. Who tried again after irrelevance. Who tried again after success. That's the secret no one talks about. Trying again isn't just for the broken. It's for the brilliant too. Because the ego loves to rest on old victories. It loves to say, I already climbed that mountain. Look at my summit. But real greatness doesn't rest. Real greatness says, what mountain comes next? This mindset isn't easy. It will make you feel insane, because everyone around you will be playing small. They'll tell you to slow down, to be careful, to be grateful, but gratitude is not the enemy of ambition. You can love what is and reach for what could be. You can honor your peace and demand your power. You are allowed to want more. In fact, your soul requires it. So how do you do it? How do you fight back against years, maybe decades, of stillness? You begin with a single act of sacred disobedience. You make a decision that doesn't make sense. You start the book you don't know how to finish. You sign up for the course you're scared you'll fail. You tell the truth you've rehearsed for years. You call someone and ask for help. You show up, even when you feel like an imposter. Even when you hear yourself saying, "Who do you think you are?" Because the only way to silence that voice is to drown it in evidence. Every small action becomes proof. You are still alive. You are still willing. You are still becoming. And in time, something shifts. Not outside you, but within. You remember what momentum feels like. Not the rush of winning, but the sacred ache of effort. The beauty of being in process again. You realize that failure is not proof of inadequacy. It's a measure of how far you've dared to stretch. And when others see you try, truly try, they begin to remember their own buried desire. That's the rebellion's ripple effect. You don't just rise, you lift. But beware, this path isn't a straight line. There will be relapses into stillness. Days when trying feels like pretending. Moments when your old identity grabs your ankle and tries to drag you back. This is normal. Trying again doesn't mean never falling. It means refusing to stay fallen. It means choosing progress over perfection, risk over reputation, life over image. And here's the truth you must tattoo into your mind. You will never regret the days you tried, only the ones you didn't. The human spirit was not built for neutrality. You were not designed to float. You were made to forge, to bend chaos into creation, to turn sweat into story, to carry the impossible one step further than anyone thought you could. This is your rebellion, and you don't need to wait for permission. Not from your past, not from your doubt, not from a world that thrives on your stagnation. You are allowed to change, to try again, to want more, to become new, even now, especially now, because the day you stop trying is the day you die. But the day you try again, even with shaking hands, that is the day you rise. And the world will feel it, because when one soul begins to burn again, the darkness loses a little more ground. So now you've returned, not in triumph, but in defiance. Not because the path is clear, but because standing still became more terrifying than falling forward. You tried again, and again, and again. You whispered, yes, when the world offered nothing in return. You walked into the arena bloodied by past failures, mocked by voices both internal and external. You stood beneath the weight of your own fear, and moved anyway. But now comes the final realization, the truth hidden beneath all the striving, the one that unravels every excuse, every delay, every cowardly calculation masked as logic. Here it is, trying is not something you do, trying is what you are. You were born striving. You learned to speak before you had words, to walk before you understood falling. You reached for light, for faces, for meaning, long before you knew what meaning meant. Trying is not a phase of your life. It is life. To be human is to be incomplete, to stretch, to shatter, to become. And somewhere along the way, the world taught you to be ashamed of that. It taught you to hide your hunger, to pretend you're okay when you're not, to mask longing with indifference, to confuse detachment with wisdom. But now you know. The soul doesn't die when the body fails. It dies when it stops stretching. Because the true death isn't physical. It's spiritual. It's not when the heart stops beating. It's when the will stops reaching. And so, the final and most powerful realization is this. You are never finished. There is no final form. No perfect version. No moment of arrival, where everything aligns and you finally get to rest in the myth of being done. Even on your best day, you're still becoming. Even in your greatest victory, you are already being summoned forward. And that is beautiful, because it means you don't need to wait anymore. Not for clarity, not for certainty, not for the right time. The right time is any time you decide to try again. That is freedom. Not the freedom from striving, but the freedom to strive endlessly. Not as punishment, not as desperation, but as devotion. To become is to worship the unknown with every step forward. To stand on the edge of your own ability and say, let's see what happens if I go further. That's not recklessness. That's reverence. The Zen masters call it beginner's mind, a sacred ignorance that honors the infinite. To try, not as someone seeking mastery, but as someone who knows mastery is a moving horizon. And suddenly, everything changes. Trying is no longer about success, or outcome, or validation. It becomes a ritual, a way to say, I exist, I matter, I'm still in this, even when no one sees, even when no one applauds, even when your efforts fail over and over again, especially then, because the trying itself becomes the triumph. You were never meant to be static. You are not a statue to be admired. You are fire, and fire consumes. It devours what you were to make room for what you might be. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's endless. Yes, it means you will never feel completely safe. But what a glorious danger, to live a life where there is always something to chase, to build, to transform. Imagine this, you're old, skin wrinkled by the years, body soft and failing, voice barely a whisper, but your eyes, they burn, not with regret, not with nostalgia, but with fire, because you never stopped, you never gave up on the becoming, you never allowed the world to shrink you into someone who used to be. You remained unfinished and unashamed, and when your final day comes, because it will, you'll be able to meet it with peace, not because you did everything perfectly, not because you made it, but because you kept trying, right until the end. And that's the paradox, isn't it? The day you stop trying is the day you die, but the day you accept that you'll never be done, that's the day you finally start living. So now, the final question is no longer, what if I fail? It's, what if I never try again? What if you let this moment pass, this day pass, this life pass, all because you feared the sting of effort more than the ache of regret? What if your deepest self, the one buried beneath fear, comfort, doubt, has been waiting all this time? Just for one more try? And what if this is it? Not the end, but the beginning, again. So go, run toward the hard thing, make the leap that terrifies you, speak the truth that chokes your throat, fail with your whole heart, and then wake up and do it again, because you're not here to win, you're here to burn. And fire, even when it flickers, never asks for permission to be wild, so light it up, and don't stop, because as long as you're trying, you're alive, and as long as you're alive, you are not done.